Welcome back to another lesson. In this one, we're simply going to learn how to connect our code to the animation we just created in the last lesson. Now, it is fairly simple. We're going to start by creating a graph in Mecanim. To do that, we need to open up the Mecanim window. There is two ways to do it. You can either go under Window and go under Animator, which is going to open this up, or you can simply double-click on your animator, which is weapon right here. So that's our animator controller. At this point, you should be seeing your two animations. Sometimes they do pop up. If you have done your animation in some kind of different fashion, they might not even be there in the first place. If you don't see them, go ahead and right click, create a new state for every single one of these. Right now we only have two, and rename those state using the inspector at the top right. This one would be weapon idle, and we're going to make sure to connect the motion. This is only a animation state. It's not actually going to link to our weapon idle we have down here. So we have to make sure we put the motion weapon idle in here. Now we're going to do the same exact thing for the weapon swing, and also change the motion. From here, you're going to see a pretty easy to understand graphic flow. Entry is as soon as the game starts. What happened when the game starts? Well, weapon idle is what happens when the game starts. Now, if this arrow is actually pointing towards swing, like this, make sure you right click on the proper state, the proper one that should be executed when the game starts, and you're going to turn this into the default state. Okay, now what happens at this point is that the sword enters this state and it just gets stuck in here because nothing can get him out. As you can see, there is no arrow pointing out, there is no arrow pointing to anywhere really, not even the exit. Now in our code, what we could do is once your weapon is idle, and only when your weapon is idle, you're allowed to swing, assuming that X condition is met. And we can create those conditions using parameter at the top here. So make sure you go under parameter, and then you'll have a empty list. We can then create a list. These are all basic variable. You can use variable types. You can use a float, you can use a int, a boolean. In our case, we're going to be using a trigger. Now, this trigger, I will be calling it swing, and I'll go over how to use a trigger in a second. If you would be using a float, it would be fairly simple. You could say if that float is bigger than say 0.5, then you do this. Now, this is really useful for, say, speed value. What you can do is keep feeding the speed value to your animator, and then your animator checks if the float value of speed is below 0.5, you can now walk. If the speed value is above 0.5, then you should be running. So the animator in here could be taking care of that logic. Now, there is a boolean as well. It works just like a normal boolean. And finally, there is the trigger. Now, the trigger is something you activate only once, and it's not getting unactivated until it's being consumed. So just like a boolean, you turn it on, but it never goes off until it gets consumed. In this case, what we're going to do is right-click on weapon idle and create a transition. Now, just like this, if we were to play this, what's going to happen is you're going to play the weapon idle animation, and automatically after that one frame, which is just one frame, it is going to go to weapon swing. Let's actually give it a look. Sorry about that, the game actually crashed for some reason, so I'll just have the same exact layout work again. We had something like this, and I have mentioned that if you start a game, you're going to play weapon idle, which is only one frame, and then you'll move on to swing. So let's give this a try. As you can tell, we played idle, and then we're stuck in a loop with the weapon swing. So we have to make sure we limit that to only when we press on the trigger. Now, it's also important that you need to find a way to escape from the weapon swing, so to exit the weapon swing. So we're going to right click on weapon swing and put a link back to idle, and we're going to have this nice little side-by-side transition thing going on. So this one is when you're going to weapon swing, and then it just swings, and once you're done, it goes back to weapon idle. If we play this, you'll see that we'll be jumping from weapon idle to swing to idle to swing, and that forever. Now, how do we go and fix this? We have to put a condition on one of these two transitions. Of course, we'll want to put the condition on this one over here because that's the one that goes from idle to swing. And these conditions can be found on the right hand side over here under condition. We can simply click the plus sign and then you can meet as many conditions as you want. In our case, we only have one parameter, so they automatically put it on swing, and if we don't trigger swing, this is what happens. It repeats idle forever and always. Now, we're going to be triggering swing from our code, but right now let's do it manually by clicking on this over here. Now there seems to be a problem over here when the animation actually plays for a second time, and that is not because we've created a bad animation, this is not because we have some extra keyframe, it's because of the blending and how the whole animator work together. As you can see, if you click on one of the transition, you're going to be seeing some settings here with the blending time. Say you completely reduce that to 0% or 50 in this case. You're going to be seeing that the transition is now fixed. We can just do that like this, and it is going to remove all the blending. You could either go and do that. You can also make sure there is no looping by clicking on your animation and turning off the loop time. I'm currently under weapon swing and I just turned off the loop time. As far as the weapon idle goes, I'd like to leave that on loop just in case for some reason one of the value of the sword gets corrupted and it has to put it back on the default location. Alright, now if you want to make sure that you have the same exact animation as I do, you're going to go under the transition in between swing and weapon idle, and you're going to make sure to just collapse this back to 0 and then put it back to like we just did a second ago. Now since I've done it here, it doesn't show up anymore, but I just collapse everything here back to 0. So turn it like that and move this all the way over here, and then it disappears. So we get a result that looks like this. Make sure it is both way. Actually, just one way is fine, but I just made it both way and it still looks good. And we now have our player moving around, and we still can't swing using the code, but at least the animation is now clean. So this whole state machine in here, even though it is a very, very simple one, it now works, and we're now ready to go implement that in the code, which is a very, very easy task to do, guys. I'm going to go under the search and find my weapon.cs script. We're then going to open up this weapon.cs, and then we'll need to have a reference to the animator controller. Okay, so if we head at the very top here, we have the swing part for the field, so we're going to create a new private animator controller, or just animator in this case. That's the type in the code. Animator controller is just the name they gave it in the inspector. And we're going to make sure to assign it during the start. So we'll say anim is equal to get component type of animator. Just like this. And now when we swing, we're going to enable that trigger. And the way we do this is by taking our reference, in this case anim, and we're going to say set trigger, and then it's going to take either the ID in int or the name of the trigger. In our case, we called it swing. Now note that you can do this for set float, set boolean, set int. You have every parameters we saw. You can also get those to see what is the state in the animator, but this is how you transfer values to the actual animator. So now what happens when we actually call swing after pressing on spacebar? It is going to do the same exact operation as we've done manually. So it's going to go here and click on the button, but of course it will do it in the code, not manually through the window. Let's give this a try. We're just walking around. We're going to press on spacebar, and we didn't even see it because it got consumed instantly, and that's because there is no exit time. Assuming we did have a exit time, you're going to see it for a slight second here. As you can tell, it does pop up, and then once the weapon.idle animation is completed and the whole blending is done, then it does consume it. But like we said, we do not want an exit time. We want something to be extremely fast, and we can now go here and actually hit this guy. Nice. So we just completed the very, very little section about the animator and the animation window, and now we have this animation of our little guy swinging his sword in front of him. And if you guys realize, we also made sure to turn off the collider of the weapon. So Right now, we have no box collider on this thing, so if we just walk here, we get pushed away and the enemy suffers no damage. So it's gonna be up to us to press on spacebar to make sure we can actually kill this enemy. And he might need some slower movement speed, but thus far, we do have a working combat mechanic, and it is quite cool. Alright guys, I will be catching you in the next section where we're going to start laying down a menu. So some kind of UI that is going to let us upgrade the weapon, going to let us see how much pesos we have, going to let us see what is our current character skin and how also to change it. So I'll be catching you guys in the next section.